was quite a few years ago. For those of you that do not know, from a background standpoint, I grew up northwest out of Houston, so Highway 290 was very far way out of Houston. We lived in rural Texas. Of course, that is not so much rural anymore because Houston's growth as Texas continues to grow. Think about this. As you wake up this morning, hard to imagine, there's roughly about another 1,200 people that called Texas home today. Tomorrow when you wake up, guess what? There's about another 1,200 people that call Texas home tomorrow and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. So half of that depends from year to year. Half of that is natural growth. Half of that are people that move from the other 49 states and that moved literally from somewhere around the world that moved to the state of Texas. And we have had that growth for quite some time and expected to continue to have that growth. We have businesses that are relocating to the state of Texas, new businesses that are starting in the state of Texas. It's obviously small businesses are the economic engine, the employers, the vast majority of the employers and the economic creativity. However, it's harder to quantify those. Mostly we end up talking about the big businesses that move here, relocation and or expansions, because that's easier to catch as a headline than a new business that's starting. But the point being is we're continuing to have that growth. And if you back up again, just kind of as I was mentioning when I was a first-term legislator, that was a very difficult budgeting session. We had an economic downturn. As we entered into that legislative session, we had roughly a $10 billion deficit. And $10 billion in 2023 is a lot of money. $10 billion in 2003 was a whole lot of money. And so we were trying to figure out how do you cut this budget, continuing to focus on public education, health and human services, transportation, criminal justice, the things that we expect for funding of government. And so the budget was cut, and one of the things growing up on a family farm northwest out of Houston was important to me was water, and always has been. And the district that I represented was very critical and dependent on water, as every community is. The one thing that we all take for granted when we first wake up in the morning and we turn on the faucet, what do? We expect to have running water. Whether it's in our own individual households, our lives, or our businesses, everybody has to have it. So backing up, I was very trying to defend a portion of the budget. A fellow colleague of mine that was entering that year as well wanted to cut a portion of the budget and move the money somewhere else, and it had to do with water issues. And I walked up to the back mic to ask some questions, and then I finally asked the question. I said, what is the one thing that we have to have in life? What is the one and only thing that we have to have in life? And he kind of went off in another direction. So I came back to my question again. He went in another direction. I asked my question again. I think we went back 3 or 4 times, and finally I thought, I'm going to get you to answer this question. It's not complicated. All I want you to say is water. That's all I want you to say. I was thinking that as I was trying to think another angle. So finally I came again, and I said, what is the one thing that we all have to have in life to be able this, and this? And he looked at me and he said, Glenn, it's just called love. And that's when I thought, okay, you're not answering my question, and you know it's water, and I know it's water. And he just smiled really big. And so then we did talk a little bit about water after that. And then the next week when I showed back up, he went home, I went home. I showed up, and there on my desk Monday morning when I got back from the chamber and the House floor, there was a bookmark that I still have in my desk today. 3 offices later, moving to the state senate and moving as your controller and CFO for the state of Texas. And in my desk drawer is a bookmark. And what does it say on the front? Love. And every time I see that bookmark that says love, what do I think about? The importance of water that we have in the state of Texas. And fast forward in 20 years now, we have grown immensely in population. Again, we have grown in businesses. We have grown more in Fortune 500 companies, more than any other state in the nation. Texas has more. So we are growing in people. We're growing in population, whether it's here in Central Texas or wherever it's across the state of Texas in the 12 economic regions. If I stood in this spot when I got elected into office and was in my first term 9 years ago, I would have told you the state that you call home, that I call home, that we all share in common, would have been the 12th largest economy in the entire world. Think about that. Texas 9 years ago was the 12th largest economy in the world. Yet I can't tell you that today. You know why? Because in those short years, we've moved from number 12 to number 11 to number 10 to number 9. And I can't even say 9 anymore. You know why? Because today, in this year, Texas is literally the 8th largest economy in the entire world. Think about that. And part of that is because what you do in the state of Texas, businesses do. People ask me all the time, Glenn, why do people continue to move to Texas? And I tell them the answer is really simple. It's the same reason that my family had a leap of faith in 1846 and came to Texas. You know why they came in 1846, and I'm a sixth-generation Texan? The same reason that families do today, for an economic opportunity for themselves and an economic opportunity for future generations. This legislative session, the antithesis happened to my first session. Instead of being a $10 billion shortfall, the legislature had a once-in-a-lifetime, a unique, a historical cash carryover balance. And so the question was, what do they do with this once-in-a-lifetime, will never repeat itself, even with all the growth that we're having? We'll continue to probably next session. Sorry, let me clarify, members. Hope not this next special session that probably starts on Wednesday. I'm talking about the next real session in 2025. But the point is, even with very modest economic growth nationally and globally, we think that Texas will have a significant cash carryover balance in the next regular session as well, but nothing of historical of what they dealt with. And I bring all that up and say that in part because in my role as a CFO, my role as a former policymaker, obviously they make the decisions, they make the votes, but the thing that we had to focus on, in my opinion, with that once-in-a-lifetime, that unique, that historical opportunity, was focus on things that matter for future generations. Focus on infrastructure funding in Texas, whether it's roads, whether it's broadband, high-speed internet capability, which we talked about for rural economic development for years, but what did COVID teach us? Is not just about rural economic development. It's about your access to education, higher education, public education. It's about telemedicine. For goodness sakes, it's about communities just staying in contact with their next-door neighbors. It's about people literally having church service at home. Being able to have that infrastructure is critical, and the one that we're here to talk about more than any of them is having that one that's what? Water infrastructure. Because if we don't have that infrastructure, we won't be able to keep the economic engine of Texas going. And so, as you know, if you haven't voted, there is an election that's going on. Tomorrow is election day, and there's several constitutional amendments on that ballot. Those constitutional amendments support many different pieces of infrastructure. And I tell people all the time, you know, the legislature, when they come into session, they might be able to work on one major issue. Maybe one major issue, if there's funding available, to work on one major issue for that legislative session for the next decade or 2 decades. The fact, because of the historical session we had, the historical cash carryover balance, the once in a lifetime, the unique, they could actually work on several issues at one time. That in itself was unprecedented. I ask you, encourage you to please, if you haven't early voted, which I have, I've checked that box. If you have not, I encourage you to vote tomorrow, because one of those propositions focuses on water infrastructure and funding. And if people ask me, what are the things that keep me up at night? For my own personal office, because I don't know if you noticed, as the tax collector, I say that smilingly because when I do walk in a room, some of you have heard me say this, I look for every single exit. And why? Because as your state tax collector, yes, I run the treasury. Yes, we forecast the state's economy and the revenues and what's going to happen. But when I say my 3 constitutional duties, the one that worries me and I look for the exits every time is when I tell you I'm the tax collector. And do you know why? Because my grandfather on my mom's side, Lowell Thompson, was a Baptist preacher. And I used to sit on the front row like Hugh, Representative Flores is, right up here on the front, because as a kid they made me sit on the front. I couldn't sit on the back. I don't know why. I guess they thought I'd get in trouble. But I remember my grandfather would say they stoned the tax collector, sometimes in his sermons. So when I come to a good group like you, I get very nervous to remind you people that I'm your tax collector. But as your tax collector, as the person that looks over, the one thing that we have to focus on is the economic opportunities of where we're going as a state. And one of those is making sure that we have that water infrastructure. And as the person, if I'm looking at what worries me the most, if it's internally as your tax collector, the point being is I have confidential information. It's called cybersecurity. But if it's the one thing that I worry about for the state of Texas from an economic opportunity for each and every one of you as businesses, for whatever business that's going to be, water infrastructure funding, road infrastructure funding, broadband infrastructure funding, and making sure we tend to the basic elements that government's supposed to do. So with